Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next phase of Phenomenon Radio. Phenomenon Radio is a show concept blending a radio broadcaster, one of the most high-profile military experiencers in ufology, and a seasoned UK researcher utilizing the most up-to-date and late-breaking news and interviews to create a really, truly unique radio show. This program reaches thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP and UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of this worldwide phenomenon. I'll be your host, Race Hobbs, and tonight I will be joined by my top-notch research team, James Worrow and John Burroughs. And to get it started, we'll go ahead and bring John Burroughs on. John, welcome to the next phase of Phenomenon Radio. Here we go again, brother.
Yep, let's see what we can do with this one.
Now, John, you and I, back in April of 2015, we got together in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, at a storied UFO event there called the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference. And that conference was attended by Linda Moulton Howe back then. I think she had been to like 28 consecutive events there. One of the longest running UFO events in the country at the same location. And you and I had planned on meeting with Linda Moulton Howe about an idea that you had, and you brought me into the fold. And then we together had this meeting with Linda. And, you know, her being a vegetarian, we brought her, we bought her like this massive baked potato with onions and all the fixings on it. And while she sat there and ate it, I had intended on, telling her, and you and I had intended on telling her about our show concept and our idea and everything. And literally somehow the script got flipped. And I came to know this about Linda. She started interviewing us. It became more of an interrogation on us and how we were going to do things than it was us talking to her about it. But everything worked out. Everything really went to plan, better than to plan. And in July, 2 months later, we launched Phenomenon Radio for a predicted two-season series that turned out to go, 4, and which was amazing because the success of the show was completely amazing. It just took off, and everybody seemed to be really interested in the show every week, and couldn't wait till the next week. And the feedback was amazing, and the show growth was just it was incredible. Now, sort of introduce us a little bit to the idea, the concept of Phenomenon Radio from your end. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts and how you kind of came up with this idea, because Phenomenon Radio had a unique perspective. It had a unique mission.
Well, my original thoughts were just to try to get a different perspective on what we were dealing with. So try to get the technical end of it exposed, some of the people that were involved in it. Never mind, try to right the ship on the Rendlesham Forest incident with getting some witnesses to come forward and talk about it that weren't going to be driven or interrupted by Colonel Halt or some of the other people that like to drive the narrative. Just bring them on and let them talk about it, and then tie Rendlesham in to what was going on, with the UAP stuff and everything else. And interesting enough, at the time, it wasn't called a UAP, it was UFO still. So that didn't really take shape until 2020, was it? Whatever.
There was a handful of people over in Europe, I know.
Yeah, but we weren't
using that term, but the world was not using it yet.
Well, yeah, we were calling it UAPs. I think 17 at the end, December 17 is when the concept changed from UFOs to UAPs, where everybody started talking UAP instead of UFO, including what Hillary Clinton did prior to that. And the other thing is that it changed the narrative of the show a little bit, and it kind of changed the narrative of everything, because eventually what ended up happening was it ended up First to the Stars, came in and kind of started driving everything with what could and couldn't be said and what was supposed to happen based off the New York Times article. And then after they kind of went by the wayside, which I predicted early on they would, then Lou Elizondo become the face of all this. So, but the concept was to try to just expose it from a different angle than the normal way people do it, like what it could be, or some of the things that had happened that people had seen, and try to explain some of that and everything else. And that's where I think phase 2 is going to be. We're going to dig deeper into that. Also, the people behind the scenes that usually don't do interviews, but they've done enough interviews and there's enough stuff out there, plus my personal interactions with them, that are going to be exposed for the first time, that will paint a different picture on what the general public's being told. And one thing that I've never liked is the word ufology. And if I tick people off, so be it. I think ufology is a concept that they use just like they did with little green men eating you all up. They put it all in one big soup basket, and then the cream never breaks out from the shaft. So,
and I said it at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Honest to God, and this is the truth. I felt that in my head. I was like, John is not going to like that I said that. But, for me as a broadcaster, it's a widely used term, and a lot of people recognize it as such in the mainstream media. But I get it. I totally get it. But again, the original concept was to look at the phenomenon through a new lens regarding Bentwaters and Rendlesham, from firsthand accounts and from those who had investigated it, boots on the ground. Certainly you being there and experiencing it in real time, then and there, firsthand account, not horse. I mean, this is true horse's mouth stuff. It's not second or third hand information. Linda Moulton Howe had been over there. She had investigated it from over there from an investigative journalist standpoint. And so I really thought the concept was brilliant and something that I definitely wanted to be a part of. 100% got behind it. So for a lot of you out there that are watching this for the first time and hearing about Phenomenon Radio for the first time, Phenomenon Radio ran from 2015 to 2019, with the primary host becoming Linda Moulton Howe and John Burroughs, and I produced and engineered the show, and I contributed here and there along the way. We had phenomenal success, as I mentioned earlier, but the next phase is of Phenomenon Radio is going to be just a little bit different. But we're also going to utilize some interviews, contributors, new news and information, and then scientific data and research that has come to light since we did the original Phenomenon Radio series in 2015 to 2019. Of course, like Nick Pope, I wanted to say this. Nick Pope, I remember, was our very first guest, but we went on to have significant accomplishments in things like first-time guests ever on live radio, ever. From people like Adrian Bastenza, who was, the sergeant that was literally checking weapons as you guys left the base to go investigate what was going on in the woods. He was there. He saw the faces. He knew what was going on in real time. He was right there with you and Kabansak and Peniston when you left the East Gate. And then certainly there was other contributions that he was able to make on his radio show with us, on his interview with us, that all of you are going to have a chance to be able to review yourselves and listen to yourselves, because here on at Phenomenon Radio YouTube channel and on the Unnex Networks hosting platform, you'll be able to listen to the audio of all of those historical podcasts now on Spotify, on Spreaker, on iHeart, on Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, all the major podcast platforms. We will be uploading these and allowing you to download those for your research and investigation purposes, and it'll all be for free. They will all be put to video, probably just be an image or something there with the audio behind it, and uploaded to our YouTube channel. By the way, run over and subscribe to it. It's a brand new channel. We don't even have anything up there except this video will be going up there, the very first one. So it is, you can find it at Phenomenon Radio Show, at Phenomenon Radio Show on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, just in the search bar, put in the little @ symbol and Phenomenon Radio Show, and it'll take you right to the channel. But these firsthand accounts and these first witnesses coming forward, Lori Bowen, Rick Bobo, Cookie, Kevin Day, there was a significant list, John, of people that we covered and that we brought to the light of day to the media and to the public that had never been heard from before. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to get Adrian to come forward, because that was not an easy task.
No, it was a struggle. I mean, Adrian, is the best way to put it, is he was involved. He had issues after the event that scared him. He never has been one to want to talk very much about it. And it was not easy to get him on, but he did. And we got him on once. We had him scheduled another time, and then he had to bow out. But yeah, it was an interesting show. I mean, we had, like I said, Rick Bobo on, John Tramatozzi. I think we got him to talk a little bit about it, what Bobo saw from the WSA Tower, what Lori Bowen saw on the 2 nights, the night in between the first and the third night. So yeah, we've had a real good experience expanding on the Rendlesham event. We had people like Andy Jacobson on. We had Kevin Day on. That was his first interview he ever did, as far as coming on and talking about what he was involved with, so we had Gary Nolan on as our last show where he went into the DNA. So yeah, it was a good show. We had Bruce McAfee on talking about the frequencies and what they mean and the coloring and some of the technology. We had, I can't remember his name, but he was with Project Green Glow, which is a British project. He came on, and he went into some of the stuff that was going on. So, and we had David Clark, Billy Cox. We had a lot of really good interviews that we're going to replay. Never mind Chuck DeCaro, that worked with CNN, did one of the first.
Man, he was one of my favorite guests.
Yeah, Chuck calls it like it is. He's funny.
Yeah, and we had him on several times. He was not just a one-time thing, but there were.
We had Colonel Hall too. That was the one time we had him come on with Chuck. That was an interesting interview. So
yeah, well, we had a lot. Sorry. Check 1 2. I touched my modulation over there, and it decided to go on strike. But we had a lot of contributors to the show that were periphery. They were outside of the phenomenon regarding Bentwaters and Rendlesham and the incident that happened in December of 1980 in Suffolk, England. But they had contributions that were very profound to the overall concepts of what we were trying to uncover. There was there was a Chuck DeCaro, certainly. Man, when you guys get to his interviews, you're really going to be impressed, I think, with some of the insights that he has from behind the scenes regarding think tanks, regarding programs that were going on, scientific data and testing and all of that. Daniel Litz, the late Stanton Friedman, Grant Cameron. I'm going to go down this. Stu Bundy, Les Valles, Nick Redfern, Peter Levenda. Peter Levenda was a really Winston Keach with Ronnie Dugdale. Winston Keach regular on his own. Ronnie Dugdale is an investigator and a contributor, one of the fine people that I've come to know since we did Phenomenon Radio. We had David Fravor after we had Kevin Day. Retired Navy Commander David Fravor came on with us. You know, of course, Peter Robbins, co-writer of Left at Eastgate with Larry Warren, and that whole incident that came, well, how that whole story came to a head, and Peter Robbins wound up, you know, disassociating himself with Larry and denouncing the book and everything else eventually. So, you know, that was a part of the Rendlesham story. Kevin Knuth, Calvin Parker, Dr. Richard Bowsey, amazing interview, that one. You know, George Knapp, the list is there's too many to mention, really, to go over, but you know, there were a lot. John.
Oh yeah, Jeremy Corbell, who dropped a bombshell that I knew about, but was told to keep quiet about, when he said that special operations were brought into the Skinwalker Ranch area, had an encounter, and then had health issues and had the phenomenon follow them back. And the next week we did Knapp, and Knapp was shocked that Corbell actually talked about it and confirmed it. So, yeah, we had some breaking stuff that came out, you know, and the interesting thing is, I don't know, I want to be careful how I say this, but that was a big deal that special operations was brought in through the funding of Harry Reid, had an encounter at Skinwalker Ranch, was verified, and yet nothing much was said about that.
That's true.
It was just, that shocked me. That's why I have a problem with ufology. And what I mean by ufology is that too much of it is, it's got to be one way or the highway. They don't want to look at all the possibilities and what it could be or couldn't be. And if it doesn't fit their window, then they don't really want to listen to it or follow up with it. That was a huge story that should have been followed up with FOIA and everything else. And I was really disappointed. We had who's the guy that does the Green Vault? What is it? Or the
Green, you're talking about Greenwald.
Yeah. There was no FOIA on that. That was actually military operation. There was no FOIA. None of those guys. We had Paul Dean come on, you know, and he does a lot of FOIA, but nobody seemed to grasp that and run with it. I just, you know, it's kind of like when you get this stuff out there, people don't know what to do or how to handle it and stuff. And, you know, and we're going back now to these UFO conferences, and nothing against them. And there's new stuff usually every year, but with the government kind of pulling the plug on this whole operation. And I know people will still think there's hope that because they put into law the fact that they have to open up more. They haven't opened up before, and this last report kind of really threw some cold water on everything. I'm afraid we're just going to go back to what we did before, complaining about how the government's never telling us what's going on, when in fact we kind of hold the keys to the car, where I think if people started digging deeper, we could do our own disclosure instead of waiting for the government to do it. But that's kind of what I'm hoping we do here a little bit. We kind of open the door up and go behind the scenes on some of the people behind all this and what it could all mean.
I have often said that. Most people don't trust the government anyway these days. So why would they trust them if they came forward and said anything about UFOs? Unless they literally brought the house with it.
Wasn't it Reagan saying it? We're from the government. We're here to help. Run as fast and quick as
run as fast as you possibly can. And also, I wanted to bring up Richard Doty. You know, Richard Doty came on to Phenomenon Radio, and I'm not sure he had done any radio, you know.
Oh, I think he done some shows on and off, but it was a very
In a while though. It had been a certain amount of time before
he was just starting to get back out there and stuff. And I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say tonight, but this is the way I'm going to be all the way through this. Richard Doty is now his job has been taken over by Lou Elizondo. Lou is the new Richard Doty of driving this.
Has he been given a bird name yet?
No, I don't think so. But what I mean by that is Doty was out there. Yeah, Doty was out there putting out truths, but scrambling things up so much it was ever hard to get to the bottom of it. And that's kind of how I view Lou in some ways. He drops these little statements and then leaves it hanging or whatever. And hopefully down the road, as we do with this show forward, maybe we can get a few interviews. But here's my problem with interviews. And we didn't have a huge problem with it with Phenomenon overall, but it seems like you can't really ask the tough questions. You can't really go out there and put somebody on the spot. And I don't mean to embarrass them, but to get straight answers, and the few times that we did get to certain points, even like that Green Girl guy, I can't think of his name now. All of a sudden he classified up. Oh, I can't talk about that. That's classified. Oh, that's classified. Well, that's classified. And all I'm getting at is that I've yet to seen anybody not do a hardcore interview with Lou, where you sit down and you come up with 12 or 14 good questions and you force him to answer them. And one way I force him is don't let him off the hook with, a softball answer. No, I really want to know, like explain to me, Lou, how you could leave the government and say you were against them and want disclosure to come out and then turn around and go right back in and take a job with the government again. Because that's what he's doing. And Danny Sheehan confirmed that. We had Danny Sheehan on too. We interviewed him. So wait a minute. How can you 1 minute be against what the government's doing and the next minute working for them again? Please explain that to me, Lou. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of questions that aren't asked. They softball it because they're afraid, that if we make them mad, we won't get the answers. We won't get them back on again. Well, that's just boring to me. I'm bored. I'm bored with a lot of this stuff that goes on and stuff. And why not? Let's start trying to dig into who these people are, what they're about, what they're involved in, and what's going on. And then see if they'll respond to the piece that we do, maybe with a follow-up interview.
A lot of the strengths of that is getting people on the record at the time. And, it's vitally important that when researchers and investigators come up with a theory, you know what? By all means, nail that theory down, ironclad it, and have that research, in your own words and in your own terms and in your own beliefs. But that should never close your mind to anyone else's contributions or ideas or theories on the subject or on, the topic at hand. You made a good point about how research, because it's very territorial. It's very much in a lot of aspects, this is my case. This is my evidence. This is my research. And the work you do, you should get credit for your work if credit's due. There's no question about that. But none of you own any of these cases. None of you have the right to try to corner all the aspects. If someone wants to go to a landing site or a crash site, they shouldn't have to contact you through a government agency, contact you because you are the liaison or whatever. You're the keeper of this patch of land that's owned by the public and that anyone can go see at any time legally. But there are people that have literally been referred over and over and over again to go to certain people, to go to certain places that they don't have to, just simply because they have cornered the market And the fact that there is a market, a commercial market, is the ridiculous aspect that I'm talking about. Every one of you have the ability to investigate any of these cases and any of these instances or any of these events that happen, and you have the right to come up with your own conclusions. Nobody here certainly is going to be trying to command your thoughts and command your thinking on anything. We're simply presenting evidence, ideas, theories for your consideration, for you to take away and for you to think about and investigate into and research into and come up with your own thoughts on it. The Rendlesham event specifically gives us, a very well documented case in many respects, a very polluted case in even more respects by players that were involved in it firsthand. But I'm here to tell you that John Burroughs, in my thoughts and in my regards, involving the incident in Suffolk and at Bentwaters and Rendlesham, John Burroughs is the most solid witness that's on the record today, in my opinion. And I've interviewed Colonel Halt and Jim Peniston. I've interviewed so many characters and so many people that were there from Rendlesham. And there's some good ones. There are some really good witnesses that are out there. But in Phenomenon Radio, ladies and gentlemen, we interviewed some of the very first boots on the ground. We brought those contributors before us on Phenomenon Radio, the original version. Dot Street, Jenny Randalls, Brenda Butler. They were there back then, John. And, those are researchers from across the pond. And we're not leaving that chair at the table empty. We have one of the best researchers in the UK on our team, and let's bring him in now. Ladies and gentlemen, James Worrow. James, thank you for standing by. That went a little longer than I expected it to, but welcome to the show, and thank you for all of your contributions up to this point regarding the Rendlesham case. You're a storied researcher over in the UK, and you have done some fascinating work. You co-authored a book with John that I still have yet to complete, but everything that I've gone through so far is top notch. And I want you to have this opportunity right now at the 30-minute mark to introduce yourself and tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about who James Worrow is. And so you have the floor, my friend.
Right, I'll do my best. I'm a guy that grew up at the age of 6, fortunately enough to be able to read different magazines, and Fate magazine and the Unexplained magazine, only through the fact that my dad used to work for a company in London, and he used to get freebies. He used to distribute magazines, newspapers, and all manner of material overseas, and he used to bring home, his little, and I was always interested in that kind of thing, from a young age. I've still got them now, and as time goes on, I think the next memory I can recall is asking, when I was 11, asking my religious teacher whether or not, excuse me for saying this, I was 11 at the time, whether or not Jesus was an alien. Now, I was at a Catholic school at the time, and
oh boy,
and you can imagine the laughs I got, and I was expecting the school, and the look from the teacher, but her response was quite, well, I say flattering in a way, thinking about it now, in the sense that she kind of poo-pooed what I said, but she also said, well, he could do many things and many wondrous things, and not many people could do. And the glass continued to laugh, and that was it. But aside from that, as I said, my life literally is. When I was younger, again, when I was 9 or 10, we used to have a library. I used to frequent quite a lot. And I didn't have many friends anyway at the time, and I used to go to the library quite a lot. And every single book I used to get was all to do with UFOs, the mysteries, strange occur, anything related to that type of thing. I used to get, bring home and read, knowing that there was only a certain amount of time to be able to put the books back. So I spent a lot of time doing that. But as life moves on, I eventually say it's I grew up with a lot of stories from my family and other bits and bobs, that most of us, I suppose, when we grow up, we hear of, and it either goes in one ear and stays there, or it goes out the other ear, and you never think you never remember it again. But fortunately, with me, I think a lot of these weird stories that you used to hear about other people and that always kept with me, and I was always intrigued. Is there something to this? Is there? And like most people, for a long time, you have no means of being able to investigate it unless you have the tools to be able to investigate. And I think, obviously, like for me and a lot of people, especially when it comes to information, was obviously the advent of the internet, and being able to use computers and that to research and to be able to talk to people and to be able to communicate with people and go to and fro, about and meet groups of people, and again, that were interested in this type of thing, but you felt you would never be thrown out of the pond just because of a certain thought or a certain thought process. And I think that, and from that, I'd say I got married, I got divorced, and like most people, you have these things in your life, and it came a time in my life where I was diagnosed with something, and I was offered the opportunity, just to go out there, enjoy yourself, literally, but just make sure that you concentrate on things that that interest you. And the first thing that came to my mind after doing a lot of time at work and that, and getting away from this subject, was going back to it. And then, say, call it synchronicity or something, whatever. But then a few weeks later, I noticed something on the internet that John Burroughs, Richard Dolan, and I think it was Larry Warren at the time, were doing a conference at Woodbridge. And I said to my mum and my father at the time, I said, this is really, really interesting. It sounds interesting. I've always been into this anyway. I mean, when back in the 90s, I used to go to UFO conferences up in Leeds. It was hosted by the late great Graham Birdsall of UFO magazine.
That's a pretty popular event over there in the UK.
It was, yeah, and I was so lucky to experience that as well. Especially meeting Nick Pope and other members of the UFO group at the time, and Larry Warren himself as well. Met quite a few people. Timothy Good, the great author. Timothy Good, had a lovely chat with him one day. That was fantastic. But yeah, and basically, sorry, I'm going backwards and forwards here.
Oh, that's fine.
I said to me, Mark, I got to this conference. We booked tickets, went to the conference, and we sat there, listened to Richard Dolan's bit and Larry Warren's bit. But when John Burroughs started talking, and he started explaining, he had this big screen on the background, and I just sat there and just listened. And it was the only time I think that I felt, there's something in properly involved here. It was almost like that click moment where you go, hold on, there's something that absolutely rings true in what he's saying and the way he presented it. And what intrigued me more was the fact that John was actually, it almost like he was asking for help. He had this much, and therefore, and I sat there and I just said to myself, I'm going to help this guy. I'm going to help this guy. And that was it from there, that point on.
Interesting.
and it set a course in my mind. And I went back home, and on the way there, I was sort of texting Facebook and things like that at the time. And and things literally just progressed from there, pretty much. John asked me to maybe look into the technology side of things and stuff. Obviously, a lot of this stuff have been, some of this stuff have been already written by a great author called Andrew Pike. But unbeknownst to me, once I started doing the research, and I didn't even know about the work that Andrew Pike had done. Halfway through the research, Andrew Pike actually was kind enough to like the work that I was doing. And he also recommended, reading his original book, which was hard to come by back then. So I managed to get a copy of the book, and after reading literally about the first 400 pages of the book, I contacted John, and I said, John, it's like I've read this book before. I said, there's so many consistencies in what I've been looking at and what this guy has been trying to put forward. I said, I need to run with this. I need to move this investigation forward. And to try to cut a long story short, some of it is within the context of the book that we published together, but a lot of it needed a lot more research, and I feel that just doing more research has revealed a few more interesting sides of what could be a bigger story.
That's how it works, isn't it? A lot of the time, and that really is the fuel behind the next phase of this program. You go on the record and you do some works that exist out in the public, and then people come forward, data is released, projects and declassified papers are released to the public, and things come to light, I should say, that lend themselves well to the research already being done by us, and therefore we need to properly place it, vet it, and then and see sort of fill the gaps. Fill in the gap is a good term, I think, to use for some of those holes that were in the research that we had all done prior. The subtext of the Phenomenon Radio Show is the weaponization of UAP. You see it, right here. And that also was, in the title of the book that you and John did, which is paramount to the work that we're doing here. And, John, tell us a little bit about the book itself and the development of the book. Tell us how you and James came together to be able to, co-write this effort together, and how it's been so far.
Well, when I came over, when he was talking about that conference that I did, the interesting part about that was I had just caught the MOD in a lie prior to that, saying before they'd said they released all their documents, caught them. They admitted to me in a FOIA that they hadn't.
Now that was in the big document dump, the big UFO document.
Yeah, well, that was the one that David Clark did. Nick Pope did some early, and then the last one where David Clark was doing the presentation, they said, that's it. We've released everything now. We're not going to take any more inquiries. That was part of what they used Condign for, to say that it wasn't of defense interest. But so we caught him in a lie, and we're coming over there to do all that. Now, sent press releases out to everybody, and no one really responded to it. Well, then I met James, and after I left, it was funny. It really was, because I left like the next day, or a couple of days later after the conference. And as the plane wheels up, left from Heathrow heading back to the United States. I forget which paper it was. The Star, I think it was. Is the Star over there, James?
Yeah,
the Star ran a release from the MOD stating that, oops, we have some documents we still haven't released yet.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't acknowledge it while it was there, but they did acknowledge it after I did my presentation and all the press releases. They did admit they were holding on to documents. And I can remember with I gave David Clark a hard time for a while because he'd been the face of it. Well, we're done, nothing left. But little did I know, which he showed me all the emails later on down the road, that he actually got set up by the MOD. And he thought they were going to release some of the documents that they held back. And so he was in a fight legally behind the scenes going through the FOIA procedures to get those documents released. So even he got duped, the famous David Clark, as far as being the voice of reason, as they call him over in the UK, always trying to find a legitimate reason why something happened, not something from somewhere else. So afterwards, James and I kept in touch, and through his research and some of the stuff I'd done prior, we came together to put together a picture of, well, I think we could do a pretty good job of explaining what was going on there at the time, including, like, one of the things that James came up with early on was that, and some other people try to take credit for it later, was the fact that the blue lights that Colonel Halt saw in the sky actually were plasmas being controlled by lasers from the ground. And the thing about plasmas is you can have lasers that you can see and you can have lasers that you can't see, creating the plasmas that move around the sky like what we saw. And also when Keats came forward, and it's in the book too, and he did a couple interviews on phenomenon where the radars themselves, they can be using to provoke the phenomenon, can actually cause the plasmas to do certain things. So we just put the book together. We put Pat Frasconi was the lawyer that was helping me. Cheryl Bennett was the staffer for John McCain that helped get my settlement. James's research, Wynn's research, Ronnie Dugdale put together a great timeline of all the stuff that had been talked about of Rendlesham over the years, and we put it out there. And so now we want to expand on that with some new research, like James said, and we want to do some of the expansion too on this radio show, where we're going to dig deeper into the people behind the scenes that have been working on this weaponization for decades now.
That was very interesting. And I'm trying to remember who that was that we had on from Project Greenglow. And
give me a second. While you're keep talking. I'll get it. I'll get his name.
Yeah. The quest for gravity control was a big subject that we looked into for a long time. And, as we move forward with the capacity that we're in, I wanted to bring forth to the both of you and have you, just sort of have you, put your 2 cents worth in about the state of the social media sphere that we're in, because, and this brought me to, James had said earlier about, the creation of the internet and how the internet got involved, and how we started to be able to, because I remember those days. We all three remember the days where we went to libraries and we subscribed to newsletters and groups that were interested in this subject. There was nothing as widespread as it is on the World Wide Web. But
again, if you don't mind me interjecting, Race,
sure.
Again, lots of that stuff came from ARPANET itself. They were DARPA programs that we used to or utilized or created to try to distribute, information at a speed faster than the adversaries could.
Right.
And lots of this is to do with information and the speed at which one can, gain it, and then, study it, and then do whatever they need to do with it.
Right.
The professor's name was Ron Evans.
Ron
Professor
Evans. That's it. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Ron
I didn't. I had to use Google. So.
Well, good. Well, Ron Evans, that was a fascinating interview, and the insights from it went far.
Well, do you remember how he slipped up and admitted the F-117 was being observed by radars in England in 1979? And the official government statement was the F-117 wasn't even flying or off the drawing board in 1979. So we got some interesting things out of people. If you pushed them hard enough, sometimes you get a little tidbit. And that's what I mean about interviews. I think that people, if they want to come on, they should answer the questions and not. General Williams told me, how you go to charm school, they put the officers in charm school. They tap dance around everything. And then when you really get them pinned in the corner, then they use the classified card. Well, I can't really go there. It's classified. Well, what do you mean? You can't hide behind that all the time.
The truth is, if you have classified information and you're NDA'd to not be able to talk about it, you best just shut your mouth and stay out of it altogether. You don't even need to be talking about any of it.
Well, sometimes I don't fault people like Kevin Day and those guys that come forward as witnesses. The government somehow exposes them. Do you know what I mean? Like the article you never heard from Kevin Day during the New York Times till New York Times came out. So they opened up a window of different witnesses and different people. But then you have the people like Lou Elizondo that comes out of the shadows and puts himself at the front of the pack that wants to be the spokesman. Those are the kind of people that if you can't talk about mostly what you know,
does
why
anybody
are you out there
know who's feeding Jeremy Corbell these video clips and this information? Does anybody know where he's getting it from?
Well, he got tied into the To the Stars group, and he then through NAP he ended up there in Skinwalker and stuff.
So is he in? Could he be anything more than just a modern day?
Well, Race, do you remember Jeremy Corbell? He was down trying to hustle some a video down at Roswell that year we were down there.
Yeah.
So he was running around at these conferences, offering his services to videotape and do interviews. And all of a sudden he got snagged and got put into the forefront of it. So, he played the game. And what I mean by the game is that if you're willing to go along with what they want you to say and do, sometimes you benefit from it. You know what I mean? You get to be in there, but in reality, unless he can prove me and other people can prove me wrong, because I'd love to interview him again, would be, did you really learn anything other than what they wanted you to know? And what they wanted you to put out.
How fascinating would it be to go back and interview Bob Moore? The players get played. The Nick Popes, Clark, all of these people that have a government connection, and have, they get played.
Well, the thing is, like, I'll give you an example.
Some of them come forward and admit it eventually, and some of them don't.
Well, like Annie Jacobson was an example. They called her, a Pentagon, or she wrote for national security books, right?
Right.
But all she really ever got, and I'm not cutting her work down because she had some decent books, but she just got what they wanted her to know.
Right.
There was very little of, wait a minute, I've been doing the research and I'm asking you direct questions that I expect you to answer. That's what I'm saying. That's the problem with this field in a lot of ways. They don't want to answer the hard questions. They as long as you play their game and you ask them what they want you to ask them and stuff, then you're okay. But the minute you want to start really want to understand and get some straight answers, you get pushed aside, or you get a talk around, I call it. They talk completely around it, and at the end of the day, there's not straight answers. Now, the interesting thing that James and I are going to work on is going back and digging into all these interviews, and maybe we can piece together some of what they've said in print and, you know, on radio and TV and stuff. It's just like I remembered this show Unidentified. They had a clip where Lou comes out and starts to talk a little bit about what goes on down there in the straits down there south of San Diego and the technology. And they cut to a commercial like they did. And that was the last you heard.
Right.
There was no more follow-up on where he was going with his thought about the technology that was down there at Catalina Island. It's no different than what's the technology down there in the Florida area that's right there where those aircraft carriers had their encounters. Never mind the technology that's over in the Gulf that's being used over there. The Nimitz had an encounter over there, I believe. So you don't get to the nuts and bolts of it. And if you try to get to the nuts and bolts, if they're even willing to take the question, then they throw the classified card out every time.
Yeah, as the dead end.
Yeah.
Well, as we're coming up on the end of the program, we've got about 3-4 minutes left for the show. And I wanted to give James the opportunity to give a synopsis on, you know, the contributions that he will be bringing to the show and, you know, what we can expect in the future from the next phase of the new Phenomenon radio show.
Okay.
I just laid it in your lap, didn't I, James?
Okay, bear with me. Well, obviously, there's going to be say more emphasis on questioning what this sort of phenomena is, in rather than it obviously being one thing, being possibly being many things. The weaponization.
There's, you know, for the sake of saying, there's the element that it could be a naturally occurring event, it could be an extraterrestrial event, it could be a military event, it could be a combination of 1, 2, or 3 of those.
Oh, it could be. You know, even the like, you know, the Dalai Lama's explanations on these beings. You know, himself has his own opinion. You know, and there's other theoretical physicists from the year 1671 that have theorized, a chap called Henry Moore that theorized that spirits existed within a fourth spatial dimension of our physical world. And this was back in 1671, and there's, you know, and much of that is all to do with a quantity that he described called spititude, which is a quality of state or of being a thick or dense compact matter, you know, and how this can potentially be manipulated in a sense. And that was all them years ago, you know. And then we obviously have the more upcoming quotes from people like Carl Sagan in 1969 about the idea of benign or hostile suit beings from other planets visiting the Earth clearly belongs in a list of emotion-rich ideas.
Right.
He then carries on saying that there are 2 sorts of possible self-deceptions here.
Right.
He continues, either accepting the idea of extraterrestrial visitation in the face of very, very small evidence because we want it to be true, or rejecting such an idea out of hand in the absence of sufficient evidence because we don't want it to be true. And he then says each of these extremes is a serious impediment to the study of UFOs. They affect different categories of people. And these are the kinds of, you know, the forward ideas of on what we're going to be discussing without giving too much away.
Right. Fantastic. John, same for you, my friend, real quick.
Well, I mean, there's things that you have to look at, like what's the quantum, I can't think of the word, I'm having a senior moment, where you can actually, people all want to say you have to go forward in time and backward in time. What if you're here, but you can slow time down? So whatever takes place is in a different, it's the same timeline, but it's just, you're in a point where it's a little bit slower than what the average person is dealing with at the time. I mean, there's those thoughts. And then there's another theory. Yes, time dilation, right.
That's it.
Then there's which is not something that's been really talked a lot about, but it's there. And then there's another thought, okay, which is kind of woo-woo, but what if you got a timeline, past, present, and future, and the present, the future keeps coming back and adjusting the past to modify the future. So it makes it more advanced. Like, for an example, there's one show that always stuck out to me that when it first came out in 1980 and the aircraft Nimitz was in it, where it was called The Final Countdown. And they supposedly went in a time anomaly, went back to World War II. Now, you were talking about less than 40 years difference, and they showed the discrepancies in what that Nimitz carrier could do in 1940, 41, right? So this was less than 40 years later. What and how the people reacting in 1941 reacted to technology from 1980, which is less than 40 years, difference. And then the interesting thing was they threw another curveball in where somebody got left behind and meant the ship when it came back. And that very person was running a defense contracting company that may have made the Nimitz be possible for what it was a lot quicker than it normally would have been.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things there that could tie into what we're dealing with, what we're seeing, and everything else. And not just the fact that something from Zeta Reticuli is beaming signals or has visited us, is hanging out on planet Earth. I mean,
that's true.
And James and I are going to go into that. And like you said earlier, it's up to people to sit there and look at it, maybe do some more research and see where they want to go with it. But there's a lot to this that needs to be expanded on, including the very people that are behind this, the engineers and physicists that are driving the future of technology right now. So,
right. Well, okay. James, John, I want to thank you for being here with us tonight live. And I'm going to express a few things in closing to the audience. And then I'll see you guys in a meeting this weekend. And we're going to talk about what's going down on the next program for all of the people that come to view it. So thank you both very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. As for my closing thoughts a little bit, the one thing that I want to say about my perspective in all of this after over 30 years of doing this is one thing. The species of human beings on this planet are the only species on this planet that do unique things like wear shoes and clothes and, create machines to carry us from one place to another. We're the only creatures on this planet to ever leave this planet. There are hundreds and hundreds of things that human beings do that out of the millions of other life forms on this planet that do not do it. And there are things on this planet. There are things that we call the 7 wonders of the natural world. And I'm going to use the pyramids because they're the last ones still here out of those wonders. I believe that those pyramids were here thousands of years before the Egyptians and the pharaohs ever found them. I believe some of the works that were involved in tooling a lot of the things that are still in existence over there were impossible for the pharaohs and their followers and their people to have done for, the time and the tools. They couldn't have done them. There was someone else here long, long before us. And there are stories in a book that tell of that same thing, that tell of giants that walked the earth and that people and civilizations that did magnificent things, and that tell of lights in the sky and influence from things that were unnatural in the natural world. That's where my research has taken me. That's where my belief is in this subject. There was a Project Garnet folder placed in front of our friend Linda Moulton Howe one time by some people in the Air Force at Kirkland Air Force Base that simply stated within it that the Earth was covered with, 6 billion people that had been influenced by, foreign DNA, that had been modified. Their DNA had been modified, that we were essentially, 6 billion androids walking the earth. I don't think that idea is far-fetched, considering that we're the only species on this planet that really is running from the natural world like we've been struck in the ass by lightning. We're the only species damn set on completely eradicating the environment that we came from. And that would suggest that within us is there's a natural programming within us, or maybe unnatural, that suggests that we have programming in us that doesn't match the world we're in. And whatever that is could be natural. It could be completely a natural evolution of things, but I don't feel that way. I don't feel natural with that at all whenever there's so much evidence to suggest otherwise. So that's where my thoughts are. That's what empowers me to get up every day and to look into this subject, research this subject, talk about this subject, produce this subject, engineer this subject on radio and video. I want to thank Margie Kay, the owner of the NX Network, who has graciously allowed us to broadcast this new show, this next phase, on the UNX Network at unxnetwork.com and on their YouTube channel, the UNX Network, the KUNXDB YouTube channel. You're going to be able to find it there as well. John and James and I will be doing these shows bi-weekly to start. And our idea is to do a 1-hour show and then come on after that show on the YouTube channel and take questions from the YouTube chat. You can post your questions in there in real time, and John and James and I, or John and I, or me and James, or John and, James, or one of the three, or all three of us, or two of the three of us will be there to interact with you and to answer your questions in real time and take questions from you and suggestions from you and comments from you in real time in the second half of the show, which would be a 2-hour block from 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock on the UNX Network on Fridays. Every Friday from 8 to 10, right after the UNX news show, Margie Kay and UNX News is from 7 to 8. We'll follow her from 8 to 10, and then Clyde Lewis from 10 to 1 on Friday nights to close out the week, to anchor the show, to close out the week. So that's sort of the premise. And this has been a free-form conversation between the three of us. We didn't do a super amount of preparation or get ready for it, because we want everything to be organic and natural for all of you. You're going to see me do things like put on chapstick. You know what I mean? It's not going to be this ultra polished show. We are bringing our thoughts, our opinions, our research, our data, and some really compelling interviews to all of you. And we hope you enjoy it. And we hope you go away from this program feeling as though this was time well spent. So if you would, run over and subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel at Phenomenon Radio Show, Hit that bell and get all the upload notifications in real time. And we thank all of you, and we hope that we earn your subscription, because we're going to be working real hard to give you some stuff that we really think you're going to be able to use in your research and in your investigations into this phenomenon, up to date and historical. So with that said, I want to also make this announcement. I did in the beginning. I want to do it in the end, that the classic Phenomenon radio shows that all of you have heard us talk about, there's a lot of you watching and listening that listened to every one of those, that was there for all those shows. We're going to make them available to you for free. So you'll be able to download them on YouTube and or watch them on YouTube on the Unnex Network YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch them on at Phenomenon Radio Show YouTube channel, and you'll be able to download the audio MP3s on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, Tune. I want to say iTunes, but now it's Apple Podcasts, and then of course Google Podcasts and a lot of others. So we'll be giving you all that information in some commercial breaks on the show in the future with all the information you need. And I want to thank all of you for being here, for taking the time to come listen to the show. And we will see you guys next week with our very first programmed edition of the next phase of the Phenomenon Radio Show, the weaponization of UAP. Have a great night, everybody, and a great weekend.